Welcome to my channel, where the scariest stories come to life. Before we dive into today's chilling tale, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you never miss a story. Now, let's get into the horror. This event happened 14 years ago. I was 13 years old at the time, and my family loved camping in our trailer, so we decided to go camping in the middle of Easter break. This trailer was over 20 years old, so it didn't look very enjoyable. We decided to go to the Micho State Forest, which was about 200 miles away from us. Once we got there, we noticed only one other camper at the campsite. This camper looked brand new and had no windows. Our family wasn't concerned, but being younger, I was kind of freaked out. I had always been a paranoid child for whatever reason. I read stories about how kidnappers would live in the middle of nowhere, in state forests and just woods in general, and they always had these types of campers. That night, we decided to make a campfire to toast some marshmallows. Every once in a while, I would look back at that trailer and wonder who was inside. After we ate all of our s'mores, we went to sleep. I decided to lock the door because I had a strange feeling we needed to. I'm a very light sleeper, so I woke up to the sound of the door handle rattling ever so slightly. I saw I was the only one awake, so I was petrified. I decided to sit up and look out the window. Outside, there was an older man jiggling the doorknob. It was, of course, locked, but he was still trying to open the door like it was no one's business. Even more frightening, he was holding a knife. After seeing that, I immediately woke up my parents. The older man heard me wake them up and ran into the woods. After they listened to what had happened, we packed up all of our stuff, drove out of there, and reported it to the police. They checked the area where we were, and the new camper was still at the campsite. When they went inside the trailer, they found the deceased bodies of a family of 5. There were knife wounds all over their bodies. I can't imagine what would have happened if we hadn't locked that door that night. My husband and I play music together, and in August 2017, we were on tour through Nevada and California. After our show in Reno, we decided to drive through Yosemite to our next gig in Fresno. We opted to take the arguably less scenic route, traveling down the California-Nevada border. By the time we made it to Highway 120 for Yosemite, it was dark. Since our van was our home and we didn't have to set up a tent, we weren't too concerned. We figured we'd just stop at the first campsite we saw, park the van, and explore the next day. The further we went, the darker it seemed to get, and for being one of the most populated national parks, it felt eerily deserted. It was a little after 1 a.m., and while my husband continued looking for any sign of life, I leaned back and started to doze off. As we slowly drove along the winding, 2-lane forest roads, I felt the car slow to a stop, and the music we were listening to cut off. I was about to ask what was going on, but just as I began to speak, Ryan said, "Amanda. Amanda, look. Look, do you see that?" I leaned my seat up, and about 50 yards in front of us, partially lit by our headlights, was a figure standing on the side of the road, wearing all white. The person stood with squared shoulders, head down, but facing in our direction. Ryan asked if I thought it was a ghost, and I genuinely considered the possibility. We hadn't seen a town, a person, or even a car for hours. There was no reason for anyone to be out here, especially so close to the road. Ryan slowly released his foot from the brake, letting the van crawl toward the figure. When our headlights fully illuminated the person, now about 25 yards in front of us, Ryan pressed the brake again. It was a man, barefoot, wearing a white button-up shirt and loose, taekwondo-style pants. His stoic expression didn't change as we approached. We just stared at him, and he stared back, clean-cut, shaggy brown hair, mid-20s or 30s. He no longer resembled a ghost. The bottom cuffs of his pants were torn and dirty, and I thought I could see a shadow behind him in the light. His hand wasn't outstretched like a hitchhiker's, and he didn't have any belongings with him. I wasn't sure if he was looking at us or through us, but he stood there, his attention fixed, with or without a van shining its beams in his face. His eyes didn't even squint when the light hit him. Something felt so off. I remember saying Ryan's name out loud, my tone definitely conveying concern. I wanted to speed up and get past the man without saying a word. Ryan hit the gas, and we zipped past him. We both had goosebumps for the rest of the drive, and I was wide awake from that moment on. We drove for a while without stopping, but eventually, we turned into a campground, opting for a spot under what seemed like the only streetlight in the entire place. If you're entering the park from the east, this was just before Tioga Pass, right before the east entrance of Yosemite. I was 20 years old. I had left home at 16 to explore the world and see what I could find. I had spent most of my life in Texas and Louisiana, being raised primarily in Louisiana. I traveled all over the US, from Missouri to New York, California, and anywhere I could go. But eventually, I decided it was time to go home. At the time, I had been staying in Oklahoma when I received a phone call from my mom, who said she might be dying from cancer. I later found out that wasn't true, she just wanted me home. I started hitchhiking through Oklahoma and ended up near the Chickasaw National Park after 2 days. I still needed to catch a ride, so I stuck out my thumb, but no one stopped. Eventually, I gave up and decided to pitch a tent in the national park. After setting up my tent, I decided to explore a bit and followed a paved road until I reached a camping area. There was a fire pit off the road and a clear area with picnic tables, so I decided I'd camp there for the night. As I continued exploring, I followed a deer trail into the woods. While walking, I glanced to my left and saw a hawk lying on the ground with no head. It had been burned off. An eerie feeling crept over me, but I brushed it off, thinking I was just being paranoid. I had experienced paranormal events before, but never involving animals. I returned to where I had set up my tent and waited until dark. The tent flap was left open because it was a nice, cool day. Eventually, night came, and the street lamps along the paved road turned on, providing just enough light for me to read. At the time, I was reading Anne Rice's Queen of the Damned. As the night wore on, I started to get sleepy. I reached up to zip the tent flap when I looked toward the street light directly in front of my tent. Under the light stood a creature, tall, almost as tall as the street lamp itself. Its hair was wild, long, and tangled. It looked slightly hunched, and I couldn't see its eyes because its hair covered its face. From what I could see, its fur was black, and the skin that peeked out was as white as chalk. The only part of its skin fully visible was its hands, which hung past its knees. Its nails were so black, they seemed to absorb the light. It just stood there, and the air around it seemed to vibrate with a static-like energy. I was startled, of course, terrified even, but something inside me shifted. Beneath the creature's hair, I saw white appear, almost like it was smiling at me. It stood there for what felt like forever. Then, suddenly, a strange feeling came over me. You may not believe me, but I know what happened. I felt a surge of anger, rage, even, building inside me. I got out of my tent, stood up, and faced the creature, staring it down. I'm not afraid of you, I said. You have no power over me. I began reciting prayers, something I had seen my grandmother do when she felt evil spirits were near. The creature seemed to laugh, which only made me angrier. I repeated myself, I'm not afraid of you. You have no power over me, and I continued reciting prayers. I wasn't sure why I was doing it, but it felt right. The creature and I stared each other down for what seemed like an eternity. My rage kept growing until I heard a loud snap behind me. I quickly turned to see what had caused the noise, but there was nothing there. I immediately realized the creature might be behind me. I spun back around, but it had disappeared. That night, I bundled up in my sleeping bag, but my sleep was plagued by nightmares of the creature standing over me, grinning its toothy smile and laughing. The next morning, I packed up my things and glanced at the streetlight where the creature had been standing. There was blood on the pole. The anger I had felt was gone, replaced by sheer terror. I gathered my stuff and left as quickly as I could. I headed to the highway, stuck out my thumb, and finally, someone stopped to give me a ride. I've never been back to Chickasaw National Park, and I never plan to. Be careful where you camp. When I was 14 years old, something happened that I've never told anyone about, and even though I'm now 48, I struggle every day to forget it. I was born and raised in Puerto Rico, in a town very close to the El Yunque rainforest. My friends and I used to go fishing and explore parts of El Yunque all the time. On this day, my friend Jose and I went swimming and fishing for a while since school was out. We took our usual route on our bikes, hid them, and continued on foot up the mountain to the creek where we always swam. We had a blast with some tourists who had found the stream, but they eventually left, and we stayed behind. We started fishing nearby when we realized it was getting dark very quickly. We hadn't brought any flashlights, because we had forgotten them, and back then, there were no cell phones. We struggled to find our way back, slipping and sliding all over the place. We came to a stop when we heard trees and branches snapping ahead of us. We thought it might be wild pigs or dogs, so we climbed one of the trees and stayed silent to see what it was. A few minutes passed, and Jose decided to climb down. He was trying to join me where I was, and I could see him in the darkness because of the moonlight shining through the trees. Then, suddenly, he just disappeared, as if he had been swept off his feet by something. I stayed quiet, frozen in fear. I didn't even try to find him. I looked from the tree, listening, until I heard him call my name. For some reason, something inside me told me not to answer. I watched as he ran past my tree, and 5 seconds later, I heard a commotion nearby, followed by his screams for help. I was petrified, not knowing what to do. I was just a child, watching my best friend get hurt, and I blamed myself for not doing anything to help. I was stuck in a trance of fear. I could hear him being dragged away by something in the darkness. I stayed in that tree for hours until daylight came. When I finally climbed down, I ran down the mountain without looking back, grabbed my bike, and went straight home. My parents weren't home since they had gone to work. They didn't even know I had been missing the night before. Jose's parents alerted the police, and I told them he wasn't with me that night because I was afraid they would blame me for what happened. They searched for days, and on the 4th day, they found him, or what was left of him. His belly was torn open, his eyes and tongue were missing, and the police said there were no signs of animal predation. So, what happened to him? I think about it all the time. Maybe if I had helped him, he'd still be alive. Why was I such a coward? I lived in North Carolina. I won't say where exactly, for privacy reasons, but my friends Caden, Alex, and I decided it would be a fun idea to go camping with some weed, alcohol, and a .38 revolver. We chose a nice trail near a lake we all liked. It always seemed relaxing, but I was completely wrong about that. It took us about an hour and a half to reach the campsite, so when we finally got there, we weren't in the mood to set up right away. We decided to walk around for a bit and enjoy the view of the lake. After chilling out for a while, we all agreed it was time to set up camp, as it was going to get dark soon. Alex and I worked on setting up the tents, while Caden started the fire and began cooking rabbit stew. Here's the important part. I remember Alex struggling and asking me, "Hey, can you help me with this?" because he couldn't get the rods through the loops. After we finished setting up, we asked Caden if the stew was ready, and he said it would be done soon. That's when I suddenly felt a cold sensation down the back of my neck, like I was being watched. It creeped me out, so I put on my holster with the .38. My friends noticed and asked what was wrong. I told them I felt like someone was watching us, but they just shrugged it off as a joke. Their reaction made me feel a little better, so I let it go. Fast forward 3 hours, and we were sitting around the campfire, smoking joints and drinking, when I felt that cold sensation again. This time, I didn't say anything because I didn't want to seem paranoid. Instead, I told them I was getting tired, and they agreed it was time to turn in for the night. We put out the fire, and Alex said he had to go take a leak. Caden and I were cleaning up when, not a minute later, we heard Alex call out from the woods, "Hey, can you help me with this?" Something was off, it didn't sound quite right. The voice was distorted, and what freaked us out the most was that Alex had gone to the right of the camp, but the voice was coming from the left. Caden and I looked at each other, completely freaked out. I called Alex on my phone to see what was going on because I was too scared to go into the woods. He picked up, sounding confused. "What are you talking about?" he asked. I replied, "You just asked for help. What do you need?" Alex sounded even more confused. "I didn't ask for anything," he said. At that point, I pulled out my .38 and told him to get back to the campsite right away. I stayed on the phone with him, listening to the crunching of leaves under his feet, but strangely, I didn't hear any footsteps outside the camp. Then, we heard it again, clear as day, "Hey, can you help me with this?" I was terrified, my eyes started to tear up from pure fear. I turned to look at Caden, and I saw that he had the same horrified expression. We both knew that wasn't Alex calling out, but the voice sounded exactly like him. It felt like an eternity, but maybe 20 seconds later, we heard footsteps coming from the right side of the camp. We peeked out of the tent and saw Alex walking back with his phone in hand. We quickly told him what had just happened, but he didn't believe us. He said we were just too crossfade, which was partly true, but we insisted that what we experienced was real. Alex wanted to check it out, so he asked for the pistol. I told him no, but he called me a coward, so I reluctantly agreed to go with him. As we walked toward the area where we heard the voice, an awful smell hit us, like something dead was nearby. It was so strong it made me gag. Alex insisted on walking a bit further, and that's when we heard it again, "Hey, can you help me with this?" Standing in front of us was a 7-foot-tall, pale creature on its hind legs. Its legs were crooked, its eyes glowed white, and its entire presence radiated pure terror. Without hesitation, I pulled out my gun and fired 6 rounds into its chest. We heard it growl and scream as we ran back to the camp as fast as we could. We didn't know if it was following us or if I had heard it enough to stop it, but we packed up our gear as quickly as possible and got out of there. That happened a few years ago, and to this day, I still feel sick thinking about it. Thanks for sticking around till the end. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to give the video a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a terrifying tale. See you in the next one.